Uberdan's elemental hit. So you might be wondering, Uberdan, why Dan? Well, first of all, Dan is the man. He is pretty much the best boss killer in modern PoE today. He got the world first Uber Elder on hardcore, which was awesome. And elemental hit is back. It's incredibly powerful. It's really cool the way that they brought it back and the mechanics that they essentially gave us to give it more damage and turn it into one of the best boss killers that we know today. So in this guide, I'm essentially going to go over the mechanics from a very basic standpoint and then get into the nitty-gritty of it, as well as explain the gear choices that he made and kind of show you how to cut costs a lot. A lot of the things that people were ragging on him about was that he made the build so expensive. It's not really that expensive. He just decided to min-max it because he's Uberdan. He's going to make the best build possible for killing bosses. And this build can kill some bosses. So, you know, we're just going to watch this quick clip of this tier 14 boss getting melted. And so, what is elemental hit? When you look at the gem, it's a mouthful. There's a lot of words on it. It's really confusing to new players. It's honestly kind of confusing to even experienced players. So I'll give you a basic rundown of it. It's got the three basic elemental damage types on it. What happens is it chooses one of the types and then it'll fire that type, and it won't do damage of any other type, right? So for example, it'll choose to do 590 to 1096 fire damage, and then it won't do any cold or lightning, right? But there are rules that you can change. This game is very, very malleable, and you can do things to manipulate this gem to make it do astronomical amounts of damage. We'll get into that. So it's an AoE skill, it's a melee skill, it's a bow skill. It's incredibly versatile. You can use it in basically any kind of attack damage build. So it's also an interesting skill in that it doesn't really scale too much off of the weapon that you're using, because every level that the gem gets, it does more damage. So for example, if you upgrade from a level 20 elemental hit to a 21, you will see that it will do quite a bit more damage. So the other thing about it is that there are 4 types of ailments that you can apply onto monsters. For every ailment that you have on a monster, it does 10% more damage. So 4 ailments are Ignite, Shock, Chill, and Freeze. And they need to be applied by a certain amount of damage onto the monster. So without making it incredibly complicated, fire damage ignites, cold damage freezes and chills, lightning damage shocks, right? And unless you're bending the rules of the game, if you're not hitting with that elemental damage type, you're not going to be applying that damage ailment, right? But there are things that we can do to get around that. So this is where elemental hit becomes really complicated, and essentially by taking advantage of certain mechanics in the game, we can turn it into a god tier skill. So there are these new threshold jewels that you add, that if you put them in your tree, you put them in the right spot, you can isolate the kind of damage that elemental hit does. So you can make it not choose cold, and you can make it not choose lightning, and then it will do exclusively fire damage. And you might be thinking, well, you know, you're wasting 2 jewel slots and then you're only doing fire damage, so you're ignoring all the others. Well, the trick to that is the way the gem mechanically works right now is that if you convert the cold and lightning damage to fire damage, even though it's only choosing fire damage, because the cold and lightning have been converted into the fire damage, it will do astronomical amounts of fire damage. So if you can find a way to convert all of the cold damage and all of the lightning damage to fire damage, I mean, just add all those numbers in the pile up and you're gonna see you can do insane amounts of damage with elemental hit. So the first thing is a +3 6-link short bow. Directly proceeding this, I'm going to show you a way to craft +3 bows. The reason why you would use this instead of, say, something with elemental damage is because if you see here, you know, you have like thousands of elemental damage. if you slot this 2020 elemental hit into this +3 bow, it gets a lot more damage out of it. So the best mileage that you're gonna get out of you know, your run-of-the-mill rare bow is to get a +3 bow. It's the best option for clearing. And then your weapon swap is gonna be a chin soul, because chin soul gives you 100% more damage when you're attacking from close range, which will beat out the +3. 100% more damage is really powerful for this build. The way to kind of think about elemental hit is it's like an attack spell. The more levels that it gains and all this other stuff, the more powerful it will be. This helmet is honestly kind of garbage. The only reason I got it is because it has exactly what I need. I needed int. It gives me exactly the amount of int that I need. I need to balance my reses in a very specific way, which I'll go over when we get to the Flasks section. I needed high lightning res. This was like 15C. If you want to go full juice, you get something with 110 plus max life, a lot more resists, and a GG helmet enchant. So he got Blood Rage attack speed. So this build uses Blood Rage. More attack speed is always good for elemental hit. It increases the damage by quite a bit. Drill Neck is the budget option for this. It gives you 50% increased damage, attack speed, or max life. That's all you really need for this build. If you want to go ahead and do more damage or whatever, you can get a Shaper Quiver, you know, pretty decent item level, and roll it. You can get move speed on it. You can get elemental damage with attacks on it. You can get way more life, like 95 plus. But this was just a really cheap option. You throw it on, it's nice. You know, you really don't need that much more than this. Glove socket is Tomb Fist. The reason why you use Tomb Fist is because when you socket with a Murderous Eye jewel, you intimidate enemies. Intimidated enemies take 10% increased damage, and the way that this works in the game is that it's essentially a 10% more multiplier for you, because they are taking 1.1 times damage, right? So all your attacks are doing 10% more damage to them. If you stack more increased damage on monsters, right, that's only additive on the monster side. So that's just something to consider. So you know, if you intimidate, they take 10% increased damage. Anything else that would make monsters take increased damage are all put in the same pool, right? So it's quite good. 10% multiplier is nice. The jewels that you're going to be looking for here, ideally, if you wanted to like really juice it up, you're looking for attack speed, because it's way better for scaling a high elemental damage build. But I really don't want to break the bank on this, so I ended up just getting, you know, decent you know, damage jewels to attacks and max life. The boot, I don't need any of these sockets, so I'm just leveling more elemental hits. This is just for more move speed when I've killed, so nothing special. But when you're boss killing, you absolutely want Combs Roots. Combs Roots give you quite a bit of life. That's really nice. And then it gives you Unwavering Stance, which makes you stun immune. On top of that, not being able to be slowed below base speed is essential. It's absolutely essential for a boss like Uber Elder, where he does that suck mechanic, where he like does that cone that like slows you down, because when the Shaper is doing all his garbage at you, if you get stuck in that animation and you're slowed down, it can absolutely kill you. Combs Roots mitigates that completely. The belt, what you want is max life, res, and elemental damage with attack skills. Combs Heart, so there's really no better thing for this. I mean, you could use a 6-link chest, but I mean, if I take this off, I lose 1800 life. This is the best in slot chest. There's nothing else that you can really do about it. It's just, you gotta use it. Zos Blood is really powerful because it gives you Avatar of Fire. And Avatar of Fire, if you look at it on the skill tree, it converts 50% of all other damage types, physical, cold, lightning, to fire, right? And you deal no non-fire damage. So if you remember before when I was explaining elemental hit, you deal no cold and you deal no lightning. You're only dealing fire. But if you convert all of that damage to fire, they essentially all become part of the component of the fire damage that you're firing at the enemy. So the other two that you're going to be using, first you're going to be using Pyre, and the reason why you're going to be using Pyre, it's a 1 or 2 chaos ring. It converts 40% of the cold damage that you have to fire damage. So remember, Avatar of Fire converts 50%, Pyre converts 40%. So you're getting 90% of your cold damage converted to fire damage, right? So that's really nice. And then the other one that you want to be using is Call of the Brotherhood. It's about 45 chaos, and it converts 40% of your lightning damage to cold damage, right? So you're not going to get an incredibly great lightning conversion, right? You get 50% of it, and then 40% goes to cold, and then 90% of your cold goes to fire. So it's a lot of words, right? It's like this is going to this and that is going to that. Basically, when you wear these two rings and you have Avatar of Fire, either from Zoth's Blood or the tree, you're converting almost all of your cold and lightning damage to fire damage. So that's why I said before that you can basically add up and stack all the elements together and convert that all to fire, and that is what you're shooting. It's an incredibly high number, and that's why this build is so powerful. If you don't have Zoth's Blood, this is incredibly expensive. What you end up doing is you're a very short distance, and this is what Uberdan does. He essentially goes up here, takes these nodes, grabs Avatar of Fire, and instead he uses the Yoke of Suffering. So the reason why he uses the Yoke of Suffering is because he already gets Avatar of Fire from the tree, right? And then it allows your elemental damage to shock, right? So because you have a decent amount of damage, you can actually get a fairly good shock, at least 1% of the health of the monster that you're shooting at, right? And it has a really high chance to shock already, right? So because this allows you to cheat in the game, essentially, it allows all your elemental damage to shock. So normally fire wouldn't shock, but if you use Yoke of Suffering, now it can shock. So it gives you that 10% more boost when you shock the enemy. So you're always going to have the enemy ignited because you're doing fire damage constantly, right? And now you have the option to also shock the target sometimes, which will give you another 10%, right? And then the other thing that makes Yoke of Suffering really powerful is, remember when I was talking about intimidating the enemy makes them take 10% more damage? Well, the Yoke of Suffering, for every ailment that you have on that target, they take another 5%, right? So you have Ignite, you have Shock, and then later we'll have a chance to Chill. So enemies will essentially take another 15 on top of that. Alright, in order to craft your +3 bow easy peasy, I'm going to try to craft one right now. So the first step that you need is the Porcupine Divination card. This can be found in these maps and in this zone, the High Gardens, in Act 8 I believe. I ended up buying mine off the trade site for about 6C each, so 36C for a 6-link short bow. Now, you can get other 6-link short bows off the market, but they must be item level 50 minimum. And the reason for this is in order to get the Paragons mod, right? The Paragons mod is the +1 to socketed gems. The minimum item level is 50. So, what we do here, go to Navali. Do not sell. If you sell them, you're not going to get anything out of it. Gotta trade divination cards. You get this window, and boom, you got yourself a 6-link short bow. The next step is to use a Shrieking Essence of Dread. And so what you're looking for here, right, there are 6 mods on a potential item. You need an open prefix and an open suffix. And the reason for this is, if you don't have an open prefix after you slam it with the Shrieking Essence, then you cannot get the Paragon's mod. And if you don't have an open suffix, then you cannot guarantee it with crafting, because you need an open suffix to use the bench to craft. So this is the process that we do. Just use one, check the item, see here, it doesn't have an open suffix. So unfortunately, gotta use another one. So here we have open prefix and open suffix. So this isn't like the most incredible bow, but if you're running, these are about 3C each. If you're running low on them, you know, just take it. You get a nice cheap bow. So the other requirement is Katarina needs to be level 8, and the reason for that is she gives you cannot roll attack mods, right? It costs 1 exalted orb, right? So what happens is all the things that this short bow can roll are all attack mods and resist mods, right? The resist mods are all suffixes, so it doesn't really matter for this. What you do is you roll cannot roll attack mods, right? So double check again, make sure it has an open prefix, craft the mod, it says it cannot roll attack mods. Now you go back to your hideout, stash, and then you slam it. Boom, +1 to socketed gems. So then, in order to finish the bow, go back here, remove the crafted mod. Do not scour the item. If you scour it, you lose everything, okay? You need to use the bench to remove the crafted mod. And then what you do here is you scroll down to attack speed and you hope you get 12. Right? If you don't get 12, then you try again. You have the bow finished. So there it is, a +3 bow with decent attack speed. You can quality it if you want, you know, just for fun. It's not really going to make a big difference in terms of your actual damage. And yeah, that's it. So because a lot of people don't know this, you can sell this for like 8 exalts. So one last thing to note, which is quite important, is that you cannot guarantee the Paragon's mod, because a lot of these don't count as attack mods. So if you use a Shaper bow, you cannot guarantee it. If you use an Elder bow, you can. But getting a 6-link Elder bow is way more difficult than using the Porcupine card to get one of these. So that's why this is the easiest way to get a 6-link +3 bow. So now we're going to go through the gems. Obviously elemental hit. For clearing, you're going to be using GMP, greater multiple projectiles, damage on full life. We'll get into that in a second. Basically this build is effectively always on full life, so that's a really good damage bonus. Elemental damage with attacks. Combustion, which gives you more fire damage, basically caps your chance to ignite, and also when the enemy is ignited, gives them negative fire resistance. And Mirage Archer. So a Mirage Archer is probably what makes this build so broken, is because it auto aims, right? So you shoot in one direction and then the Mirage Archer just acts like a turret and kills everything in your path. The single target setup, so mine is not completely optimized, I'll show you why. Elemental hit, what you want in your single target setup obviously is the highest elemental hit that you can possibly muster. Elemental damage with attacks, Mirage Archer, combustion, damage on full life, and this one should be fire penetration. Now it's kind of difficult to get 4 off colors that are 3 red and 1 blue on a really high dex base. Settled for 2 red and 1 blue, and I'm using slower projectiles. Slower projectiles is about like, I want to say like 80k to 150, like depending on how many things is going on, it'll do less damage than fire penetration against bosses, right? Next thing, cast when damage taken. This is like in every setup, right? Immortal Call, increased duration, right? Whenever you take spike damage, Immortal Call procs, right? And when you have, so this is the interesting thing about this build, is one of the ways that this build stays alive is because we're using the Slayer Overleech from the Ascendant tree. And the way this works is when you proc Immortal Call while Blood Rage is happening, Blood Rage is a physical degen, right? It's a physical damage over time. And this stops you from taking any physical damage. So when you stop taking any damage over time, right, the captured Arachnoxia buff, 50% increased recovery rate of life and energy shield, procs. And so, you know, you'll see yourself like you get hit, Immortal Call procs, and then boom, your life just shoots right back up to full. So when you combine those 3 things, you know, the Pantheon with the Immortal Call, casting damage taken, and Blood Rage, your character becomes a leech tank. You can leech yourself back to full very quickly, and it saves you in a lot of tight spots. And what's really clever is this is so annoying that it clips the skill, but Vol Cold Snap is how you activate Chill on the enemy. And so when you have it socketed into cast when damage taken, it won't activate the Vol portion of it because you have to manually activate it by yourself in order for Vol Cold Snap to go off. But if you take enough damage, it will do the normal version of it, which creates that little zone of freeze or chill over the enemy, which, you know, it'll slow them down a little bit, but also give you more damage, because the more ailments that you have on the enemy, the more damage the elemental hit does. So, the other thing that he does is just blink arrow. You know, you need that for mobility, and Blood Rage obviously to give you more attack speed and to do the thing with the Immortal Call setup. You need a way to get bleed immunity. The best way to get it is on a flask like this. When you're bossing, endgame bosses don't really apply bleed unless you're fighting Atsiri, so you can swap it out. A little tidbit is, do not quality your forbidden taste. If like, let's say you're fighting the Uber Elder and you know there's not going to be bleed in that zone, you want an unqualityed one, because what it does is it activates, it gives you back all your life, right? But if you have quality on it, it lasts 0.8 seconds longer, which is time that you're taking chaos damage. So it's just a little tidbit. Do not quality this flask. If you're going to use it, just use this. You want either chemists or experimenters. I like experimenters because it gives you increased duration on your flasks of adrenaline, which is more move speed. When you're using Combs Roots doesn't have move speed on it, so it's really important to have as much move speed on your flask as possible. While you're mapping, you're going to need a Basalt Flask. Freeze and Chill immunity is really good because obviously you're not going to be using Combs Roots for mapping. You want a Quartz Flask. We are a dodge based build, so we use acrobatics and phase acrobatics. This gives us another 10% to each on top of that. And you want curse immunity because curses can really screw you over in maps. And then this is Wise Oak. So this is why I was complaining that this is garbage, because I needed to balance my resists. So what you want is you want your uncapped, right? So this is what it means to be uncapped, the max number over here. You want your fire resistance to be the highest, okay? You want your fire resistance to be the highest because if it is the highest, then you penetrate that amount, right? The only other thing that you can do is make it equivalent to the others, right? I couldn't manage to do that in this build. I didn't want to spend all the time and money and all that effort, so I just made it the most. And then what I did was I made sure to balance my Cold and Lightning as my lowest, so they're both the same. So I take reduced damage of those elements, which is really important for the Elder, right? Because the Elder does a ton of cold damage, the Shaper does a ton of cold damage, and then I think the little tentacle dudes, they do lightning damage, right? So you want to take reduced damage of those. And then the fire damage, there is a little bit of fire damage in the Shaper beam, but you shouldn't be standing in it anyway, so don't worry about that much. The Ascendant is the best option. The way I used it is Slayer, right? It gives you Culling Strike, which is you kill enemies that are at 10% or lower HP immediately, a little bit of damage while leeching. The linchpin of this is that leech effects are not removed at full life. So generally, when you reach your maximum life, you stop leeching. But Slayer allows you to supersede that, and so however much you're hitting for and leeching for, you overleech that. And so when you combine that with Vol Pact, right, and you get these nodes here that give you maximum leech rate, without making it incredibly complicated, maximum leech rate gives you more leech over time, okay? There's a cap on it that's 20% of your max HP, right? And then when you add 3%, right, that's 23%, and then you can add another 6%, right? So it makes it quite a bit of extra, especially when you're stacking more and more life on your character. You get more and more leech. Vol Pact doubles your max leech rate. So normally you would have 20, now it gives you 40% max leech rate, and then it gives you +6, +6, and +6. So as you can see, when you combine Vitality Void with Hematophagy and Vol Pact, you're leeching a ton, right? And then when you combine that with Slayer Overleech, you're essentially, you can stand in front of a boss, take a big hit, you'll go right back to full life, you know? So unless you take like incredible amounts of crushing damage that overwhelms your leech, you're not gonna die. You go to Path of the Duelist, so you can start in the Duelist side of the tree, and Path over here. So this is where a lot of people differ. So I like the Raider side, and the Raider side is because when you're killing bosses, right, you normally don't get frenzy charges, even though Blood Rage gives you frenzy charge when you kill stuff, right, which is really useful while mapping. When you're bossing, if you're not killing ads, you're not going to have your frenzy charges, so you're going to be doing less damage. So this gives you essentially guaranteed max frenzy charges while you're bossing. So that's why I'm able to take, instead of getting Avatar of Fire and using these points here, I elected to get more frenzy charges because I'm always going to be guaranteed to be maxed on my frenzy charges. And on top of that, I get free onslaught when I'm on full frenzy charges, which is 20% move speed and 20% attack speed. The alternative to this, so Ascendant Pathfinder, if you can read it here, the really important part of this is Flasks gain 3 charges every 3 seconds. So every second you're gaining a flash charge back. Right, it gives you attack speed, move speed, penetration, and a percent chance for your flask not to even consume charges at all. So when you're fighting a boss, right, Uberdan will probably use 2 flasks, and then when he has them all, like with chemist rolls and all that, he gets not only multiple uses out of his flasks, but his flask uptime during the bosses, right? Like I use mine, and if I don't kill monsters, my flask will run out, right? So I have to make sure that I kill the boss ASAP, right? Or get to the next phase so I can kill monsters and regain my charges. But he doesn't have to worry about that. He has so much time to regen his flask charges because he is a Pathfinder Ascendant that it makes it so that it's foolproof. Like get this piercing node so that when you use a drill neck, you pierce at least 3 targets, and then your Mirage Archer will also pierce 3 targets, so that's really nice. And then from there you get Resolute Technique, so you don't deal any crits, but you don't need to anyway because you never miss and you do a ton of damage. And then you just get life nodes everywhere. Life, go Blood Magic because you don't need auras, life leech, life, and then the jewel sockets that you're going to be using. Ideally you want even more attack speed. If you have infinite money, you can get 4 prop jewels with tons of attack speed and max life on there. I elected for middle of the road attack speed and increased damage, so max life. And then this I use specifically so that I can balance my resists. So I'm going to finish this guide off with a Hydra run. It's a tier 16 map. With a pretty dangerous boss at the end. It has elemental equilibrium on it, so when you hit a monster, they gain fire resistance, which is not ideal. And then the other thing is monsters deal extra damage as lightning, which can also be pretty deadly. I decided to run this map because a lot of people just run like white maps to showcase their builds and stuff, and I wanted to show you something that wouldn't be like super face roll easy. Like this can be potentially dangerous for a character and kill you, but this character is extremely well rounded, very powerful, and you can get away with a lot because of the sheer amount of damage and survivability that this build gives you. It's a really smooth play style. It's obviously not the fastest clear speed, but it's respectable. I mean, this is a tier 16 map. I'm blasting through it comfortably. It's a really fun build to play, and I'm honestly really happy that they brought back Elemental Hit and essentially make it the Theory Crafter's wet dream. I would say that it does need a little bit of a nerf in terms of the conversion aspect. It's kind of powerful, a little bit too powerful for the budget. But overall, I mean, if you invest about a solid 15 to 20 exalts in the build, you can do all of the content in the game easily. Like, you can crush it. There's a run that Uberdan posted of a 2-minute Uber Elder kill. And he was basically in almost no danger at all. It was really cool to watch. So this is the Hydra kill. You put on your boots so that you don't have to worry about getting stunned. You activate Blood Rage, and then for Hydra you just want to stay behind her. I do tank this right here just to show you a little bit of the tankiness and the leech that you can take. I get Immortal Call procced and immediately go back to full life, and then here I pop my Vol Cold Snap and kill the boss.